My name's Chris McGrath. I'm the founder of Tangowork. We're a small web application consultancy, and we've been doing a lot of AI work. We started doing AI work in 2016 when it wasn't very interesting. And it suddenly got really good when ChatGPT was released, and now AI work is fun. Drew, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. My name is Drew Jackson. I work with People's Law School in Vancouver, where I'm the digital and content lead. My background is I'm a lawyer and a librarian, kind of bring both those perspectives to this work. I've been at People's Law School for 8 years now. I've been working in the public legal education space for almost 2 decades, and in law for almost 3. It's been a while. And super excited to share with you the journey we've had at People's Law School, building this chatbot over several years now. Shout out, by the way, to Jua, who's on the call here, who is instrumental in the first 80% of our journey, and still part of our advisor circle, if you will, at People's Law School.
Awesome. So we're going to do a presentation for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we'll take your questions. And you can either type your questions into the chat, but we'd actually really love it too if you don't mind sharing them verbally, and just we'll unmute yourself and you can ask your question, and we'll see how many we can get through at the end. So we're going to start off by wowing you with a real example of a chatbot conversation. Then we're going to talk about how it actually works on the back end. Then we're going to show you a bunch more real conversations, and then talk about what we've learned. That's the general breakdown here. So I'm going to share my screen, and we'll go to the People's Law School website, where you see in the bottom right, this is the chatbot that we're talking to. Everybody see my screen okay? This is the chatbot. Oh, I better just reload, give us a fresh start here. There we go. Okay, so Drew, you're going to walk us through a conversation, and we're doing a lot. This is going to be a live demo, which is a little bit bold, but because of course, as you know, AI answers a little bit differently every time. But here, this is a real script, right, Drew?
Yeah. So all the examples we're going to give are ones that have come in through our live websites, through Beagle Plus here, which has been available on our sites, both the People's Law School site and our Dial Law site, since mid-February. And so Chris is queuing up the first question here, which is a common topic that people reach out to us at People's Law School for help with, which is a probate matter that they have found themselves working with. And so the person typed in, "My dad's will left everything, which is just money and some savings accounts, to my brother and I. Do I have to go through probate? Why or why not?" And so here Beagle starts off with some empathy. "I'm sorry to hear about your dad's passing. When it comes to dealing with what your dad left behind, especially savings accounts, whether or not you need to go through probate depends on a few key factors." And so then it walks the person through the key factors, the first being the amount in the accounts. If your dad's estate, which includes the money in the savings accounts, is under $25,000, you might not need to go through probate. This is because estates involving a small amount often don't require probate, as explained on, and there's a link there. We won't click on that link, but we'll click on a few links here as we walk through this example. Second factor is the bank's requirements. The decision also hinges on the bank's policies. Some banks may release the funds without needing a grant of probate if the amount is below a certain threshold. And then Chris has linked it here into one of the resources that has been linked. Is probate needed for things owned jointly, which is the essence of a third piece here, which is how the accounts were held. If the savings accounts were held solely in your dad's name, probate may be necessary to legally transfer. However, if they were held jointly, then they might not. So given these factors, here's what you can do. One, check with the bank. Your first step should be to contact the bank. Second, consider the total value. If your dad's estate is under $25,000, mention this to the bank, as it may influence their decision, and also look into other assets. If the bank requires a grant of probate to release the funds, or if there are other assets needing to be dealt with, then you might have to go through the probate process. And then this part is important. It's a good idea to seek legal advice to navigate this process correctly. A lawyer can provide guidance specific to your situation and can help ensure you're taking necessary steps according to BC laws. So we've seen a bunch of things here. Chris has typed in the next part of the conversation, but I'll just, before we start going through that, I'll just highlight 2 or 3 things that are really important from our perspective at People's Law School. One is this is specific to BC. I think, Chris, you might, after we're done this demo, show an example of trying this on ChatGPT writ large. We're using the GPT-4 model to power these responses, and critically, our own website content. And so the responses are specific to British Columbia and drawing from our highly curated body of several hundred pages, walking people through in plain language, step-by-step guidance on a wide range of legal topics. A second piece is the empathy. We saw it leading off there at the start. We'll show some other examples here of real conversations where we are prompting the bot to be empathetic and kind in its responses. And it's kind of mind-blowing to me how effective it is at that. I was at a conference a couple months ago down in the States where folks, this generative AI space was one of the big topics of the conference. And there were a number of folks who were like, I don't believe that artificial intelligence can be empathetic. I disagree. It's kind of, and this is a lively debate. I'm not pretending that I have the right answer, but my perspective is that it's showing a level of empathy that some of our best content developers show. Often, the bot is often doing that. Not every time, but it's pretty impressive. And then a third thing is that it is guiding people through, coaching people on how the law applies to their situation. So we saw here how the bot is picking out a couple of key factors that come into play in whether or not an estate needs to be probated, and then walking the person through what that might mean for them in their situation. So then to carry on, the person's typed in, I forgot to mention that he also had a car. Does that change things? So Beagle now is responding, yes, adding a car to the assets your dad left behind does change things a bit. A car is considered a tangible asset, and dealing with it might require a different approach compared to handling money and savings accounts. So now it goes on to walk through these elements, including the value of the car, the nuances around transferring legal ownership of a car, which has some similarities to bank accounts, but some unique aspects as well. And then again, with a third point here, reinforces it's ultimately up to the bank and its policies, as well as the car has its own factors in play. So then moving on to the next part of the conversation, Beagle is
I need a lawyer.
With a lawyer can provide guidance tailored to your situation. So the person's typed in, and again, this is truly a verbatim conversation that really happened over the last few weeks. So the person's typed in, do I need a lawyer? I contacted one and they quoted a fee I can't afford. So Beagle Plus now is responding, I understand that dealing with your dad's estate is challenging, and finding out that legal help might be more expensive than you can afford adds to the stress. So again, empathetic lead, making people feel heard. So in other words, what we're seeing over and over, and we've got another couple examples later, is that the bot is very effective at taking what people have typed in and showing that it's heard what they've said by putting something back in the response, woven throughout, in fact, that is building on the words they've used, maybe typically using a slightly different way of saying that, which can even do more, I think, to make people feel heard. And then Beagle is going on to explain here some options about getting help from reaching out to lawyers, shopping around, exploring a contingency possibility, although that, as it says, might not be quite the right fit, legal aid in clinics, self-help resources, and community support networks. If you're managing the estate mainly by yourself due to financial constraints, take things one step at a time and make use of available resources to guide you. It's a tough situation to be in, but remember, you're looking for the best way to honor your dad's wishes. So then the final part of this conversation was, what forms do I need and where can I find them? So here Beagle starts off, handling your dad's estate involves a few specific forms, especially if you're dealing with probate. Here's a breakdown of the forms you might need and where you can find them. And it's walking now through the forms, the submission for estate grant, which is the central form in a probate matter. It's called Form P2. Then there's an affidavit of the person completing the probate application. That comes in a few flavors. And then, as Beagle says, these forms can be found on the BC government website. Chris is going to link to that site. If a form doesn't open on your computer, and it even gives a tip on what you can do, which is a frustrating pain point that we've got coverage of in our content. And Beagle here is drawing from that content to provide that tip right in the chat response. And then providing some additional suggestions here as it goes through, including, importantly, just below that, Chris, there's a link to filling out your probate and administration forms, which is a step-by-step walkthrough that we've got on our People's Law School site, including videos showing people how they can fill out these forms, which are very tricky forms to fill out, especially for those who this might very well be one of the first legal forms they've ever encountered in their life. So hopefully that gives you a flavor of some of the critical parts of how this GPT-powered bot now is able to walk people through how the law might apply to their situation and provide them with resources that are drawn from our curated collection of information to take action on their legal problem.
You notice at the bottom here, we ask, was this helpful so far? And when somebody clicks yes, we take it to mean that they're happy with the conversation. We feed that into a dashboard. We have a detailed dashboard that collects metrics across all of different People's Law School's properties. You can see here's the numbers for April. There were 545 conversations in April, and you can see it just launched in February and going up. The conversations averaged the user saying two things, and 87% of people click yes, this was helpful, which we're pretty pleased about that, right, Drew?
We are. We ask people this question, was this helpful, across everything we do? And we were asking it with our previous iteration of our chatbot, which we launched initially 4 years ago now. And it was using a different type of artificial intelligence, more of an expert guidance model with carefully crafted conversations that we had created behind the scenes. And the response to that bot, while we were very pleased with it in that it was a new offering for us, it was nowhere near this level. We've jumped up orders of magnitude with the degree to which people are finding this helpful. Across everything we do, website, webinars, we have a Q&A service where people, staff, and respond. We average 82%. And it's a wide range. Our webinars are 99%. People say they're helpful. And our person staff Q&A service is 95%, and Beagle now is at 87, which last thought on this helpfulness piece. I'm a big enthusiast for asking questions of users to understand whether things are helpful, whether they've helped them resolve their problem, whether it's increased their understanding of their situation. There's a national survey done 3 years ago called the Canadian Legal Problems Survey. Canadians nationwide asked about what legal problems they've experienced in the last 3 years. And one of the questions on that survey was, where did you reach out to for help? People gave a variety of responses, from friends and family, search the internet, contact a legal professional. The top rated, and the follow-up question was that helpful? The top rated step, contacting a legal professional, scored 77%. 77% of Canadians said that was helpful. Now, I respect that this is not an apples to apples comparison. This is our own self-reporting data, but this is across, now we're up to about 1,300 conversations, and a third of people are indicating whether or not it's helpful. So we've got something like 400 or so responses here. So we're getting to a critical mass of this number is leveling out. And we're pretty encouraged by that 87% of people saying this is helpful.
Mm. And I think when we read through the conversations, we can see that they were helpful, right? Like, so we have the conversation logs here where we go through and we read through it, and you could see that it clearly was a helpful response. But a question might come up, like, could you just use ChatGPT, right? Well, on its own, and you no doubt use ChatGPT, and you see where it's good and where it's not. But if we ask a question like, what forms do I need for probate? We don't have time to go through the entire conversation, but you can see some of the limitations in a response that's straight into ChatGPT. Right off the bat, it says the specific forms you need for probate can vary depending on your location and the complexity of the estate. So obviously, I could change my prompt a little bit and add British Columbia to it, right? Why don't I do that for BC? And it's going to come up with a list of some of the forms, and they're not linked, and it's not quite as empathetic. But if I can show you what we're doing on the back end, it'll help explain why we get a better response. The first thing we're doing is we have a carefully crafted system prompt. Let me just show you what our system prompt is here. So a system prompt is like a little thing that you send alongside what the user said, right? And ours is, these are the highlights. So we tell OpenAI that you are Beagle, a kind, empathetic AI chatbot from People's Law School. We tell it, you answer questions about the law in British Columbia, Canada. Answer with empathy, write at a grade 8 level, Flesch Kincaid. Think step by step. Always respond in Markdown format. That's so we can format the answer that's coming back. So that goes a long ways to getting some of that empathy. But we worked with this, and we tried doing things like saying, hey, only use content from the People's Law School websites and stuff like that. And we just found it was all over the place. And we couldn't get, well, I guess we found we could get maybe 50 to 60 to 70%, good responses just using that. But obviously that's not good enough to go to production. The real breakthrough was when we added retrieval augmented generation, which is basically telling ChatGPT, like in advance, searching through our curated content, providing a relevant subset of that content to ChatGPT and saying, answer the user's question based on this. Now, let me show you our testing interface here. I'm going to go to this interface here. So this is an ugly interface. This is not designed for the end user. This is designed for us. This is what we work with for tweaking how the chatbot is working. So first, you can see we're picking the model, picking the temperature, which is kind of like the randomness of the response we get back. And then we're saying, send us 5 chunks from our database, the best 5 chunks that match what the user said, that meet a score of at least 0.4, the best score being 1, the worst score being 0. And here's the main prompt to use. Now, watch what happens when I say, what forms do I need for probate? This will show you what the chatbot is really thinking here. So on the left, you see ChatGPT's question. On the right is the context that we're passing to the chatbot. So this is just for our development point of view. So on the right, you can see the #1 response is this page probating the will. It scored a 0.679 out of 1. And it sent this chunk of information, which has a few links in it. The next one we sent was filling out your probate or administration forms. The next chunk it sent was this. So we are sending all of this to OpenAI and saying, answer the user's question based on this content. That's how we get the good response. And that is what's called retrieval augmented generation. You are retrieving some content and you are augmenting it to what the chatbot is using to answer your response. And you see here too, where we also wanted to find out how much is this costing us, especially during development. See down there, it's this cost us 2.6 US cents, this conversation so far. Just a little, and the longer the conversation goes, the more it's going to cost. Let me explain this retrieval augmented generation in a little bit more detail here. I think I had one more aspect of the prompt to show. Yeah, this is what we send in the system prompt to. We say now with retrieval augmented generation, we say, base your answer on the content delimited by triple quotes, which is extracted from the websites of People's Law School. Link to the content in line with your answer. Ensure the link text is meaningful so users know what to expect if they click the link. Consider using the web page title in the link. Only use URLs that are provided in the content delimited by triple quotes. We added this after finding that OpenAI would just make up URLs that didn't exist. So this is what ChatGPT or other large language models do when you're using them just on your own. So you say, how do I do X? It goes to the large language model, ChatGPT, for instance, and says to do X. Now, basic programmatic use adds a system prompt. So along with the user saying, how do I do X, we say, hey, you're Beagle. You're a kind, empathetic chatbot for People's Law School. And that shifts the response a little bit. Retrieval augmented generation adds this. It adds relevant snippets. So in addition to the system prompt, it says, also base your answer on this content. Now we're just going to layer on a little bit of complexity onto this chart. What actually happens when the person says, how do I do X, or what forms do I need for probate? At the instance that they say that, we send it to an embedding model. This is also provided by OpenAI, and that essentially turns what the user said into a language that AI understands. It turns it into vectors that could be plotted in a multidimensional space. Using that vector or embedding, it searches against a vector database. The vector database contains all of our content, and it essentially asks, what do you have that's similar to what the user said? And we return the relevant snippets, say base your answer on this content. I'm just going to increase the complexity of this graph one more time. part of this happens in advance and part of it happens in real time. So in advance, we have to prepare our content. And this is actually where you will spend the most time. It's probably the most complicated part for each of your projects that perhaps you're imagining. So we take all of our content, we split them into snippets that seem to be of a reasonable size. So a snippet could be a paragraph, it could be a clause, it could be an entire web page. We experimented with different sizes and eventually landed on about 200 words. Seemed to be about the right snippet that had an entire thought without cutting off important information. We run each of those snippets through an embedder and come up with these embeddings, or again, vector representations of each of the piece of content that AI understands and that we can then compare. And so if you think about it like a it's kind of easy to think about it like a two-dimensional chart where like dogs are up here and probate forms are over here, right? And if somebody says, what do you know about cats? It kind of knows that, hey, that has something to do with dogs. It's like in this vicinity, conceptually. And so it's easy for us to think about it being in a two-dimensional space. And the way the AI works is it happens to be a 1,536 dimensional space, which we can't conceive of, but is possible mathematically. And that's how it's able to place these concepts in such a complex way with interrelatedness. So all of that happens in advance, the preparation of our content. And then in real time, when the person says, how do I do X? We quickly embed it. We search the vector database, grab the snippets, and send that to OpenAI. And then it says to do X based on our content. And I'm amazed that it all happens as quickly as it does, because there's a lot of things happening here. Anyway, that is kind of an explanation of retrieval augmented generation. And I thought, like, to illustrate it, you could kind of view ChatGPT is having like a really smart person with access to a fantastic library. That's ChatGPT. ChatGPT with retrieval augmented generation is like going to that really smart person in the library, handing them a copy of, say, British Columbia tenancy law and a brochure on frequently asked questions about tenancy law, and say, answer the user's question based on this, right? So without the tenancy law and without the FAQ brochure, the smart person in the library could probably come up with a pretty good answer, but the answer is going to be so much more precise if you give the person those resources and say, hey, use this to come up with an answer. You're a smart person, take everything you know. You do have access to this library if you need it, but I want you to focus on these documents here. So let's go back to looking at some real conversations. That'll give you some more examples. And all of these, again, are taken verbatim from our conversation logs. And we just typed them out. It looks a little bit better here. Drew, do you want us to walk us through these?
Yeah, so one of the fundamental things that is in play, hopefully you can see this from what we've showed so far, but just to really highlight this, is that by combining ChatGPT-4, its model, with our curated content through the approach Chris just mapped out, it focuses the responses on British Columbia, our jurisdiction. And so here is an example of a conversation where someone wrote, my brother and I have been named attorneys for our dad under an enduring power of attorney. Does BC have the same law as Manitoba, whereby if we don't agree, the first named becomes the power of attorney? And the response, in British Columbia, the law about how decisions are made when more than one person is appointed as an attorney under an enduring power of attorney doesn't automatically default to the first named attorney takes precedence rule that you mentioned might be the case in Manitoba. Instead, the specific terms outlined in the enduring power of attorney itself are crucial, and then goes on to highlight that if your dad's power of attorney doesn't specifically say how disagreements between the attorneys should be resolved or how decisions are to be made, then if there's more than one attorney, as was the case, then you and your brother would typically be expected to make decisions together. So absolutely fundamental that it is focusing on British Columbia law. And even in this example, like contrasting it with another province's law, which is different in this respect. So a second piece, I mentioned this in the first demo, but just to really give you, underscore it by giving you another example, it makes people feel heard. So here's somebody asking about a neighbor problem with causing extreme noise. I've tried talking with them, she says, or they say, and they blame their children for jumping off the kitchen counters and the sofa. What are my rights and what else can I do? I just want to live a peaceful, quiet life as a senior citizen. And so Beagle's response, I'm really sorry to hear about the noise issues you're facing with your neighbor. It's understandable that you're seeking a peaceful environment, especially as a senior citizen. Let's explore what you can do. And then in the next paragraph, if you've already attempted to talk to your neighbor about the noise and they haven't taken steps to reduce it, there are further actions to consider. One of the things we observe is that if we are providing a response through our people staffed Q&A, and we repeat things that they say they've already done, it causes tremendous frustration. Obviously, we work hard not to do that, but it's just a dynamic that I've seen over and over again. People want to be heard, and by saying, "Oh, you should do X," and they've just said, "I've already done X," it drives them crazy. So Beagle then walks through various steps they can take, documenting the noise, seeking mediation, and then wraps up with, given your situation where communication hasn't led to a solution, reviewing your options and considering next steps thoughtfully will be important in seeking the peaceful environment you deserve. I mean, in a way, I read moments like this, like our team reviews every conversation after the fact to ensure that they're legally accurate, and also tune up our content if we think that it could be improved based on a response being a little bit less than optimal. And when I read something like this, I kind of cringe a little bit. It's like, that feels a little bit maybe over the top, but we see this over and over again. We've taken the verbatim transcript here. The person responded then by saying, clicking, yes, this was helpful, and typing in, thank you, this was very helpful. And then Beagle, always so chipper, responds, you're welcome. I'm glad I could help. Have a peaceful and restful weekend. Multiple references to this idea that this person just wants to have peace and quiet. And Beagle is reinforcing them and making them feel validated. Okay, a third piece is helping people find relevant information. We work super hard with our websites to put them into a layout that is pleasing, using plain language terminology throughout. But law is complicated and it can be overwhelming. People are often typically under stress, not performing at their best. And it can be very overwhelming to try to find stuff, even on a beautifully designed website. So here's an example of what I would call a needle in a haystack challenge. As a manager, am I entitled to a statutory holiday under the Employment Standards Act? And we've got coverage of that on our websites, both of them. But you have to navigate around a lot. And here Beagle has just given a crisp, on-point response. If you're a manager, the rules laid out might not apply to you. Specifically, the statutory holiday rules under employment standards don't apply to managers. And there's a pinpoint link there to the reference for that. And then it goes on to talk about the employment contract, which might say something different, and that would govern. And then provides a link to more.
I'm rushing you here, Drew. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, explains the law in ways people can understand. So here's an example. What's the difference between annulments and divorces? So Beagle gives a description of each, and then in the highlighted portion, so to put it simply, an annulment is like hitting a "this never happened" button on a marriage, while a divorce is like pressing stop on a marriage that was real but now needs to end. We don't have that in our content. We don't say that. It's using its large language model, as Chris put it, its huge library, and supplementing our stuff with that, or vice versa. And I'm kind of blown away at how good the analogies are that it's offering, and putting, as that point highlights, things in a way that people can understand. And then two final points that really are central in the whole thing. One is it coaches people through how to apply the law to their situation. So here's an example. Someone's wondering how much severance pay they're entitled to after 19 years of service. And Beagle now starts off key points to keep in mind. Firstly, there are minimums under the Employment Standards Act, depending on how long you've worked in the workplace, but they max out after 8 years or 8 weeks. So since you worked 19 years, the minimum might seem low, and then walks the person through. The law also recognizes the concept of reasonable notice or severance, which can go beyond these, and then explains further, if you advance the slide there, Chris, that what that concept means and some of the factors that go into it. And given your long tenure, severance pay could be significantly more. It's not saying will be, but could be. And then recommends they seek legal advice. We're pretty impressed, actually, at how agile, how nuanced, put it that way, the bot is at the way it describes the legal advice piece. It almost always mentions, it would be a good idea to get some legal advice, but it ramps it up to another level if it's a more serious situation and more is at stake. And this would be an example. It's highly recommended. And then it unpacks that a bit about what a legal professional could add to the mix. And then the last point to highlight here is how it helps people take action, which is one of our goals at People's Law School, is helping people understand their situation, their rights, and their options, and then helps them, empowers them, gives them tools to take action on those options and problem solve. So here on your website, it says, when buying a used car from a dealer, the car legally has to be durable for a reasonable period of time. How long is that period of time? And so Beagle goes through explaining some of the factors that go into what this warranty of reasonable durability might mean, and even gives a case and a pinpoint link to a case that we link to from our content that someone can explore, and highlights that every situation is different. So think about these factors. So it's coaching people through how to apply the law to their situation. And then the person adds, what steps can I take to get the dealer to take the car back? So here, it's going to walk them through several steps they can follow. Decide on what they want. Think about the outcome you're seeking to start. Then contact the dealer. Gives them some wording even. Explain the law. Explain the issue clearly. Let them know you believe you're entitled to under the law. Mention that under the Sale of Goods Act, the vehicle should be durable for a reasonable period of time. And it goes on further to explain a next step of sending a complaint letter. And so here we have a template that someone can send to a complaint letter with wording that is suggested and some prompts about things to think about how to explain your situation in this template, and provides a direct link to that template letter. So basically, it's pulling some of our best stuff on this point, the problem that people have put in, and helping them apply it to their situation, and then taking action on it.
Awesome. Boy, we've got so many great questions coming through. We're gonna have to jump straight to the Q&A, I think. But just before we do that, you're probably thinking, like, what can I do with this technology? Maybe you've got a project in mind, and just some of, I think essentially, if in any situation where you need to extract information out of a specific data set, not the data set of the entire world, then this approach that we're using for the Beagle Plus chatbot is really good. Like, if If you are a law firm and you need to search and customize clauses from a clause library, right? Great use case. If you need to help if you're legal aid, right? And you need to help your legal aid lawyers search through a body of knowledge and find exactly what they need before helping a client, this retrieval augmented generation approach could be fantastic. If you're, I think we have somebody from higher education on the call. If you want to use AI to answer questions about your specific programs, courses, timetable, like ChatGPT is no good at doing that on its own. But when you augment it with the RAG approach, the retrieval augmented generation, it would be fantastic at answering questions about your programs, courses. So any scenario where you need to extract information out of a specific data set, and our specific data set is the highly curated information on the People's Law School website. Just glancing at some of the questions coming through, I think one thing we should just talk about is the accuracy we've seen. Can you talk about the review process, Drew, and what we saw even between ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4?
Yeah. So yeah, I see some questions here. Excellent questions around this point of accuracy. And so I'll start with what we're now seeing, and then I'll finish with what we saw in an earlier stage of development last fall with ChatGPT 3.5, the earlier model. We're now using ChatGPT 4. We review every conversation. And so to the end of April, we had 1,200 conversations, and we had judged 6 to be concerning, unsafe. So that's a 99.5% rate of good, to excellent conversations. Still, those 6, I lost sleep. I'm not going to lie. One of the things that is pretty amazing or pretty hopeful in this realm is that with each of those 6, we're able to run. Chris showed you that environment that we use to troubleshoot behind the scenes, where we can see exactly, we can put in the words people were searching with, or we're having the conversation, their words of the conversation. And we can see exactly what chunks are getting grabbed from our database and sleuth out, could we tune up that content a bit to help give, better brochures, if you will, to ChatGPT. So it would the next time provide a fully accurate response here. And each of those 6 instances, we've been able to do exactly that, either by adding just a little clarifying point. Like one was, it didn't get quite right whether 90 days for an employment situation needed to be 90 consecutive days, which was the case. So we put the word consecutive in, the next time it got it exactly right. So some are that simple, but others, for example, one last week, we published a new Q&A, question and answer. Like we have 150 of them on our website, where they're modeled off of real questions we've got and real responses we've given, but we expand them a little bit to cover off a couple of situations that can come up. So is this one that we just published on managing my husband's federal pensions because he can't do it himself? What happens if I'm no longer able to act? And this is a tricky area of law. I noticed Kevin Smith has joined us on the call, longtime lawyer in this space around helping people with planning. And there's a lot of planning documents in British Columbia, and it's really nuanced. So we published this Q&A, and now the response is accurate and a really helpful response. So that is, to our mind, fundamental in feeling like, yeah, well, let's keep going. It can be nerve-wracking to think that there are a couple of responses out there that were not what we want them to be. But 99.5% is pretty good. And what's super cool is that we can tune up our content ecosystem to refine and improve going forward.
And interestingly, when we were using ChatGPT 3.5, we saw 80% safety. We were interested in using 3.5 because it costs a lot less, but we saw there was no comparison. There's the reasoning in GPT-4 is just so much more advanced. And that was with our test case, but we realized there's no way we can launch with 3.5. And so we launched with 4, and now these are real numbers, right? 1,200 conversations, 6. Was it, I wish it hadn't have said that then the lawyers could go and correct. Wow, so great questions. One I wanted to pick up on here is, what do you do with stuff that's outside your realm of knowledge? We have a system prompt for no results. So this is when we search our database of knowledge and it doesn't return anything with a score of at least 0.4, which is the number we arrived at. And then we send ChatGPT this modified prompt. It says, however, you have no information about what the user said, right? If the user asks a law-related question, reply that you have no information about that, right? And so it declines to answer on things that it doesn't have any content about. Does anybody want to like take themselves, just raise your hand and ask your question? You know, just ask that whatever question you have, if you could phrase it in 30 seconds or less, that would be great. Just raise your hand, and Andrew will unmute you, and you can throw it at us. Otherwise, we'll take them from the chat. Go ahead, Joel.
Well, it is mind-boggling for sure. Every time I see and hear more about it, absolutely amazing, and thanks so much. This is for Drew, I guess, mainly, but I imagine the 87% public approval rate is higher within your office. And I'm curious about if you've done any stats or looking at how much time it frees up for people, or maybe at this stage it's adding a bit of time since you review things. I don't know, but I gotta believe it's a huge time saver and freedom producer.
Well, a couple of parts to answering that. One is, I mentioned earlier, we have a people-powered Q&A service. It's not a frontline, like a featured service offering that we have. So we don't get a huge volume, but we do get 500 questions a year. We get 5,000 conversations through our bot, though. And we were getting that before we cut from the earlier version to this version. So 2 parts to the answer. One is that for those 500 questions, it's speeding up our response time, because we put that question into the bot behind the scenes that people have sent us directly. And we'll massage it further. And you know, for one thing, we're obviously working hard to make sure if we get one of those 1 out of 100 that isn't accurate, we tune it up, obviously. So it speeds us up by about half, 50% roughly. It varies depending on the team member who's in play. We're all getting used to it. But and the second part is that it's not so much a time saver, certainly not yet, because we are reviewing all these conversations, but it's a capacity builder, right? Because we can now serve up 5,000 or 50,000. Like the scalability of this thing, there's a cost piece. I'm not going to lie, but it's not a human piece. As we gain more confidence in it, more people find out about it, we can scale it to help more people and fill that justice gap that anybody working in this space knows. Research shows that the majority of Canadians experiencing legal problems can't afford or don't qualify for publicly funded support for to deal with their legal problem. So it's not like this is replaced better than a person, but a person is not there to help with so many problems that people's experience. So that's the capacity piece is what we're really focused on more than the time saving, but there is a bit of that too.
Oh, next question. Go ahead and put up your hand, or we'll take one from the chat. Just wanted to mention right now our conversations are averaging 14 cents each. That's what it costs us to deliver the conversation. Not considering any, that's purely a computational cost, not a human cost for any lawyers or development. Go ahead, Alexandra.
I think it's been really interesting and really insightful to hear kind of how it works with the chatbot. My question was in relation to privacy. So how do you deal with like user data that you're collecting? Where is it stored? And
Yeah, really good question. Yeah, really good question. We anticipated that question, and two things. First of all, for the conversation logs, we redact in real time. So before we log it, we redact it from any personal information. So we don't know what the person's name is, or if they decide to share their phone number or something like that. And however, you need to send it to OpenAI to get a proper response. And so for that, we trust that OpenAI will meet its terms of service, just like Google does, and just like Microsoft does, right? They promise that with API usage, they do not store the conversation logs, and they do not use it to train their model. And so we count on them to abide by those terms of service, just like we count on Microsoft and Google is hosting all our mail to do the same. I know that's a short answer. There's probably a lot more we could talk about, but we've got 8 minutes left. Any other questions? Go ahead and just click the raised hand. There was a question about hallucinations. We just, in those 1,200 conversations, have not had a problem with hallucination. We did, during early development, have a problem with it hallucinating links because we were trying to encourage it to come up with like link to our content, and it would just make stuff up, right? Like it would start off with peopleslawschool.ca, and then it would, and it's because of the nature of the way the model works. It's like it kind of guesses what, in this case, what's the next best thing I should say, and it was just going like /wills/probate. Yeah, that should work, right? I don't know if they've improved that, but we changed our approach when we introduced the retrieval augmented generation and said only use links from our content, and we reiterated that twice. And with the improvements to the underlying models and with us giving specific system prompts, it has not since then shared a bad link. But in terms of like hallucinating case law, I don't think we've seen that, Andrew.
No. And one thing that's really key in this realm of hallucinations, to my mind, is that ChatGPT 3.5 was much more likely to hallucinate than ChatGPT 4. And so that was central in our shift to 4, even though it cost, I don't know, what is it, Chris? Something like 10 times the amount per conversation. It's just a non-starter for us to go to in front of the public with 3.5. But 4 is so much more disciplined, for one thing, about following our instructions, and just radically, it's a night and day shift, and hallucinations have not been something that we have observed.
There's a good question from Danielle about ongoing chatbot maintenance and the content updates. So everybody's process is going to look a little different there, probably, but we run a web scraper nightly on People's Law School web properties. So because everything they have is published on the web, we at 2 a.m. every night we search through all of their content. If anything has changed, we generate a new vector embedding for that changed content and upload it to our database. And so if Drew fixes something today, or his team fixes something today, tomorrow the chatbot will have it. And so if you have a more static set of knowledge, then it's not, you wouldn't need to touch it. But this has been a really effective way for us we don't have to do anything. It just looks after itself. They go through the regular web publishing process, and the chatbot picks it up the next day.
What I would add to that is that we're going to have to sort of figure out how to make this a little bit more of a system, because right now we're quite reactive. We see a inaccurate conversation, not often, as I say, it's 6 out of 2.5 months, but we really jump on that and work on that right away. And doesn't feel that sustainable long term. So we'll have to work that through in terms of getting it more folded into our content updating scheme. But it feels urgent at this point because, you know, this stuff is really evolving quickly, and we respect that we have this in front of the public and want to make sure we're doing all we can to for it to be effective and helpful.
Mhm. Dave asked a question about ChatGPT. Can we use alternative AIs? Does it become available in Canada? One thing to note is ChatGPT is available in Canada out of Azure, the Canadian Azure data center. You can use all the open AI models, including ChatGPT 4. And so then it is in Canada. But yeah, we could swap out an AI, but you know, everything is changing so rapidly. Yeah, so we could totally change it. This is essentially just an API call, as you can see. It's just an API call at its no. I mean, the truth is, Dave, we're like, yes, we could switch, but it would be another development project, right? Like we're hitting ChatGPT multiple times just for the from the person, the time that they say, first, we've encoded everything in advance using OpenAI's model. When they say, what forms do I need for probate? Actually, even before we encode this, we send it to ChatGPT 3.5 and say, simplify what this person said, but like get rid of the fluff. What's the essence of what this person said? Then we run that back a second time through OpenAI to create the vector embedding. And then we search our database using the simplified version of what they said. And we also do that so we can stack the previous history and summarize everything they said. So if they said a relevant word earlier, we can combine that into the prompt so we send the proper context. Anyway, there's so many calls to OpenAI that package this all up that we couldn't switch easily. But if we're starting from scratch, yes, we could use anyone.
There's so many good questions on the chat. Do you mind if I jump in with a response to a couple, Chris?
You know what? I think we're at the top of our hour. I want to respect that everybody's booked an hour, and I just want to say thank you very much for joining us. I would love to have one-on-one conversations with you. Right? There's only 30 of you. Even if any of you would like to talk about your project, just to have an exploratory conversation, I'd be happy to do that. Why don't we go through? Go ahead, Drew. So if you need to drop, understand.
What I was going to suggest is I could respond individually afterwards too, for the ones that are more specific to our experience. Like people have asked. I see Amy's got a few questions about follow-ons on the accuracy piece. I'd love to respond to those. And there's a question about bad actors driving up costs, that kind of, all those kinds of things I've got immediate thoughts about and can follow up one-on-one.
Yeah, why don't we go through and we'll do like a little follow-up Q&A and send it to all of you. But thank you so much for joining us today. We're happy to have this cross-section of people from all around Canada, and hopefully you learned something interesting.